There's something unsettling about online dating that most people don't think about at first. Because when you're talking to someone through a screen, it feels safe, controlled, like you have time to think, to respond, to decide what to share and what to hide. And most of the time, that's exactly how it is. Normal conversations, casual connections, people just trying to meet someone new. But the problem is, you never really know who's on the other side. Not completely. Not in the way you would if you met them in real life. And sometimes, that gap between who someone seems to be and who they actually are is much bigger than you expect. Tonight, I'm going to share three true horror stories from online dating, situations where something started off normal, even promising, and slowly turned into something deeply unsettling. Something that didn't feel right but couldn't be explained at first. And these aren't just awkward dates or bad experiences. These are the kind of encounters that leave people questioning what really happened long after it's over. The first story comes from a woman who matched with someone on a dating app. A profile that seemed completely normal. Good photos, casual bio, nothing unusual. And their conversation started the way most do. Light, easy, comfortable. They talked for a few days, sharing small details about their lives, building a sense of familiarity, and everything about him seemed consistent. He was polite, attentive, never said anything strange, never crossed any lines. In fact, he almost seemed too perfect. Always replying at the right time, always saying the right things, like he knew exactly how to keep the conversation going. After about a week, they decided to meet in person. A simple plan, a quiet cafe in the evening, nothing complicated. When she arrived, she spotted him almost immediately. He looked exactly like his photos. Same face, same smile, same calm presence. That alone made her feel more at ease. The date started normally. They talked, laughed, shared stories. Everything felt smooth, almost effortless, but then small things started to feel off. Not obvious at first, just subtle details that didn't quite match. He would mention things about her that she didn't remember telling him. Specific details about her routine, her habits, things that hadn't come up in their chats. At first, she assumed maybe she had forgotten. Maybe she had mentioned them casually, without realizing it. But the more he talked, the more specific it got. He knew where she usually parked her car. He knew the time she left work on certain days. He even mentioned a cafe she sometimes visited, one she had never talked about online. A quiet uneasiness started to build, but she tried to stay calm, telling herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe mutual friends, maybe social media, something she hadn't considered. But when she asked him directly how he knew those things, he didn't give a clear answer. He just smiled slightly and said, "You tell me more than you think." The conversation shifted after that. It became slower. He spoke less, watched more. His responses felt more calculated, more deliberate, like he was choosing his words carefully. And at some point, she realized something else, something that made her stomach tighten slightly. He wasn't really asking her questions anymore. He wasn't trying to learn anything new. It was like he already knew everything he wanted to know. The date ended shortly after that. She made an excuse, said she had to leave early, and he didn't try to stop her. He just nodded, calm, relaxed, like he wasn't surprised at all. As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her, but she didn't turn back. She just kept going, trying to ignore the growing sense of discomfort in her chest. When she got to her car, she unlocked it quickly and got inside, locking the doors immediately. For a moment, she just sat there, breathing, trying to calm down, telling herself she was overreacting, that nothing had actually happened. But then, her phone buzzed. A message from him. She hesitated for a second before opening it. And when she did, her entire body went cold. It was a photo, taken just seconds earlier, of her sitting in her car. The angle wasn't from inside the cafe. It wasn't from where he had been sitting. It was from behind her. Close, like someone had been standing just a few feet away. She looked up instantly, her eyes scanning the area around her, her heart racing as she checked the mirrors. But there was no one there. No sign of him, no movement, nothing. Just the empty parking lot. Her hands shook slightly as another message came through. This time, just text. Short, simple. You left too early. She didn't reply. She didn't wait. She started the car and drove away immediately, not looking back, not stopping, until she was somewhere crowded, somewhere safe. She blocked him that night, deleted the app, tried to move on. But what stayed with her wasn't just the photo. It was the realization that whatever he knew about her didn't come from their conversations. And whatever he was doing, he had been doing it long before they ever matched. The second story comes from a college student who had been using a dating app for a few weeks. Nothing serious, just casual conversations and the occasional match. Until she started talking to someone who felt different, someone who seemed more genuine, more relaxed, not trying too hard. And that made her feel comfortable enough to agree to meet him in person. They chose a public place, a small restaurant not too far from her apartment. Early evening, not too crowded, but not empty either. The kind of place that feels safe. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table near the window. And just like the last story, he looked exactly like his pictures. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual. The date started normally. They ordered food, talked about simple things, classes, work, hobbies, everything felt fine. But after a while, something started to feel off. Not in what he said, but in how he said it. His responses felt slightly delayed, like he was thinking too carefully before answering, like every word was being chosen instead of spoken naturally. At first, she ignored it, assuming he might just be nervous. But then she noticed something else. His phone. It was on the table, screen facing up, and every few minutes, it would light up with notifications. That wasn't strange on its own, but the name on the notifications was. It was her name. She tried not to react at first, thinking maybe she saw it wrong. But then it happened again. Her name, clearly visible. She felt a small wave of confusion but stayed quiet, trying to observe without making it obvious. A few minutes later, it happened again. And this time, she caught a glimpse of the message preview. It wasn't just her name. It was a message about her. Something like a note, a description. She couldn't see the full text, but it was enough to make her uneasy. She looked back at him, trying to act normal, but her attention stayed on the phone. Finally, she decided to ask, casually. She smiled slightly and said, "You're getting a lot of messages." He glanced at his phone, then back at her, and for a brief second, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Then he smiled again and said it was nothing, just work stuff. But that didn't explain the name. Her name, She nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but inside, something didn't feel right anymore. The conversation continued, but it felt different now. Slower. He spoke less, watched more, and then his phone lit up again. This time the screen stayed on a little longer, just enough for her to see clearly. The message preview read, "She's noticing." Her stomach dropped instantly. A cold wave of realization hit her as she stared at the screen for a split second too long. When she looked back up at him, he was already watching her. Not surprised, not confused, just watching. The silence between them stretched for a few seconds before he spoke again, his voice calm, steady. He said, "You read it, didn't you?" Her mind raced, trying to come up with something to say, something to diffuse the situation, but no words came out. The atmosphere at the table had shifted completely. It didn't feel like a normal date anymore. It felt controlled, like she had walked into something she didn't understand. She forced a small laugh, trying to play it off, saying she didn't know what he meant. But he didn't react. He just kept looking at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he reached for his phone and turned it round, sliding it across the table toward her. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Look." Her hands felt slightly unsteady as she reached for it, her heart beating faster with every second. She picked up the phone and looked at the screen, and what she saw didn't make sense. It wasn't a normal messaging app. It wasn't a conversation. It was a list, multiple entries, all labeled with different names, and one of them was hers. She tapped it without thinking, and a series of notes appeared. Detailed, specific observations about her, what she was wearing, what she ordered, how she reacted to certain questions. Even the exact moment she looked at his phone for the first time. Her breath caught in her throat as she scrolled slightly, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. And then she noticed something else. At the bottom of the list, there was a timer, counting. She looked up at him slowly, her voice barely steady as she asked what this was. He didn't answer her immediately. He just leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes still fixed on her, and said something that made her entire body go cold. He said, "You weren't supposed to see it yet." The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, like everything around them had faded into the background. She placed the phone back on the table slowly, her mind racing, trying to figure out what to do next, how to leave without making things worse. But before she could move, his phone lit up again. Another message, same format, same sender. This time the preview read, "End it." He looked down at the screen, then back at her, and for the first time, there was a slight shift in his expression. Something uncertain, something tense. A few seconds passed in complete silence. Then he stood up, abruptly, without explanation, without looking away from her, and walked out of the restaurant, just like that, leaving her sitting there, confused, shaken, and completely alone. She didn't wait. She grabbed her things and left immediately, her heart still racing as she stepped outside, scanning the area, expecting to see him somewhere nearby. But he was gone. No sign of him anywhere. She never heard from him again. The profile disappeared. The account was gone. But what stayed with her wasn't just what she saw on that phone. It was that message. End it. Because she never found out what it meant, or what would have happened if she hadn't seen it in time. The third story comes from a man who had been using an online dating app casually. Nothing serious, just occasional matches and conversations that usually didn't go anywhere. Until one day, he matched with someone who immediately stood out. Not because of anything unusual, but because everything about her felt normal, almost too normal. Her profile was simple, her photos looked natural, and the conversation started easily. No awkward pauses, no forced topics. Just a smooth, comfortable flow that made him feel like he had known her longer than he actually had. Over the next few days, they talked regularly, sharing small details about their lives, building that quiet sense of familiarity that makes meeting in person feel like the next obvious step. But there was one small thing he noticed early on, something he didn't think much of at first. She would sometimes reply to his messages before he sent them. Not exactly, not in a way that was obvious, but close enough to feel strange. He would start typing something, and before he hit send, her reply would appear, answering exactly what he was about to say. The first time it happened, he laughed it off, assuming it was coincidence, maybe predictable conversation patterns, but it kept happening, again and again. Small responses at first, then more specific ones, until it became impossible to ignore. One night, he decided to test it. He opened the chat, started typing a random sentence, something completely out of context, just to see if she would respond before he sent it. And for a few seconds, nothing happened. He almost felt relieved, until her message appeared. "You're doing it again." His fingers froze above the screen. A quiet chill ran down his spine as he stared at the message, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. He hadn't sent anything yet, not a single word. Slowly, he typed a reply, asking what she meant. And this time, he sent it immediately. Her response came almost instantly. "You keep trying to change it." The uneasiness in his chest grew stronger, but he forced himself to stay calm, telling himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe delayed messages, maybe some kind of glitch. But then she sent another message. "It doesn't work like that." At that point, he didn't know what to think anymore. The conversation felt different now. Not normal, not controlled, like he had lost whatever sense of predictability he thought he had. He decided to stop responding for a while, putting his phone down, trying to ignore it. But a few minutes later, his phone buzzed again. Another message. "You can't avoid it." He didn't reply. He didn't even open the app, but the messages kept coming, one after another, each one more specific than the last.